The day I became the most despised man in Lakeside Estates was also the day I became the most influential. All it took was $500. That's the fine Karen Wellington and her homeowners association slapped on me for fishing with my heartbroken daughter. What they didn't realize was that I had 4 million reasons to fight back and enough determination to use every single one. If you're watching this on your phone while hiding in the bathroom from another soul-crushing HOA meeting, drop a comment right now with your hiding spot. Trust me, this story will keep you hooked. My name is Remy Thornfra, and until a couple of months ago, I was living what many would call the American dream. I'd spent 15 years working in venture capital and private investments, eventually cashing out my shares in several tech startups for enough to retire comfortably at 42. But life has a way of reminding you that money doesn't solve everything. My wife Rachel passed away from cancer last year, leaving me to raise our 14-year-old daughter, Solon. The grief nearly broke us. The only thing that brought even a hint of peace was fishing, the last activity the three of us enjoyed together before Rachel's health took its final turn. When I decided we needed a new beginning, I searched specifically for a home near water, somewhere quiet and healing. Lakeside Estates seemed ideal. Upscale homes, strong schools, and a 6-acre lake at its heart. The realtor mentioned there was an HOA, but assured me it was the usual stuff. Lawn care, paint restrictions, nothing major. I should have paid attention when she hesitated before adding, "The HOA president, Karen Wellington, is very committed to keeping property values high." I brushed it off. I dealt with plenty of difficult personalities in business. How bad could a neighborhood president really be? I found out one calm Saturday morning in April. Solon and I had been fishing at the community dock for about an hour. For the first time in weeks, I saw my daughter smile. She'd just caught her second bluegill and was carefully unhooking it when a sharp voice cut across the quiet. "Excuse me, but what exactly do you think you're doing?" A woman in her late 50s marched toward us. She was dressed in expensive athleisure, her highlighted blonde hair in the classic "I need to speak to the manager" cut. She held a tablet like a badge of authority, glaring at us as if we'd been caught vandalizing property. "Good morning," I said evenly, trying to stay polite. "Just enjoying some fishing with my daughter." I extended my hand. "I'm Remy Thornfra. We moved into the house on Sycamore Drive about 2 months ago." She ignored my hand, her fingers jabbing at her tablet. "Mr. Thornfra, fishing is strictly prohibited in our community lake. You are in direct violation of HOA rules. I'm Karen Wellington, HOA president." She said it like she was announcing royal lineage. "The fine is $500. I felt Solon freeze beside me. "There must be some mistake," I replied calmly. "The realtor specifically said fishing was one of the community amenities. It was a big reason we bought here." Karen's tight smile never reached her eyes. "The rule was changed last month. All residents were notified by email. Not knowing the rules doesn't excuse breaking them." She spun the tablet toward me, displaying an amendment to recreational use of community lake dated 4 weeks ago. "We never received anything," I said firmly. "I personally send out all communications," Karen insisted. "Perhaps you should check your spam folder. I can't be responsible for residents who don't bother to read official notices." My jaw clenched, but I kept steady. Why was fishing suddenly banned? The lake is clearly stocked. I pointed to bass swimming near the shallows. Karen's eyes swept over our modest fishing gear like it was garbage. "Environmental and safety issues. Hooks harm wildlife. Residents complain about the smell of bait and fish while trying to enjoy their lake views. Not everyone wants to see this sort of thing during their morning coffee." She glanced deliberately at our tackle box. Something about her tone made me look closer. This wasn't about rules. It was about control. "We're always careful," I said. "Solon and I practice catch and release. We clean up everything before we leave." Karen's expression hardened. "Mr. Thornfra, maybe you don't understand how things work in Lakeside Estates. We uphold standards. This isn't a public pond." Long-term residents expect a certain atmosphere. She looked at Solon, then back at me. Newcomers often have trouble adapting, especially those from different kinds of neighborhoods. The message was clear, and anger burned in my chest. Before I could respond, I heard a quiet sniffle. Solon's eyes were wet with tears. This lake was supposed to be her safe place, where she could forget, just for a while, that her mother was gone. And now this woman was shattering that peace with her smug condescension. "We'll pack up," I said softly, wrapping my arm around my daughter. "Send me the fine and the updated regulations." Karen's smile returned, victorious. "Excellent. I'm glad we're on the same page. And please check your emails more carefully, Mr. Thornfra. We wouldn't want any future misunderstandings." She turned away, her designer sneakers silent, on the manicured grass. As we gathered our things, Solon wiped her eyes. "Dad, why was that lady so mean?" "We weren't hurting anything." I didn't have an answer. Not one I could give a 14-year-old. "Some people care more about rules than they do about people, sweetheart," I finally said. "Let's head home and grab some lunch." That afternoon, after double-checking every email folder, including spam, I confirmed what I already suspected. No notice about any fishing ban. That's when I decided to dig deeper into our HOA. What I uncovered was enlightening. Karen Wellington had served as HOA president for 8 straight years. Her regular job? Owner of a small but selective real estate agency that specialized in luxury communities. A quick scroll through her social media told me even more. Photos of her hosting loud waterfront parties at the very same lake she fined me for using, complete with alcohol and live music. Apparently, those community atmosphere concerns didn't apply to her. The most important discovery came from the HOA documents themselves. Hidden in the fine print was a key detail. The lake was listed as common property, shared by all residents. Nowhere did it state that the HOA had full ownership rights. That evening, as I looked out my window toward the water, I saw Karen again. This time sipping wine at the gazebo with friends, laughing as if she owned the entire shoreline. "So, it's a game of rules," I muttered. "Fine. But first, I need to find out who actually owns this lake." The next morning, I crossed paths with an older man walking his dog. He introduced himself as Merrick Henderson, a retired attorney who lived a few doors down. When I mentioned my run-in with Karen, his cheerful expression immediately soured. "Ah, you've met our neighborhood dictator," he said with a grimace. "Let me guess, she quoted some obscure rule and hit you with a fine." I nodded, and he shook his head. "Karen's been running this HOA like her personal ATM for years. Most people just pay up and keep quiet." He lowered his voice. "If you want some background, stop by my place for coffee sometime. I've got quite the collection of horror stories." I took him up on it that very afternoon. Merrick's house was lined with law books and photographs of his former colleagues. Over a cup of excellent coffee, he laid out what he knew about the HOA's structure. "Here's what most residents don't realize," he explained, opening a folder of documents. "The lake isn't actually owned by the HOA. It belongs to Meridian Development Corporation, the original builders of this community. They only leased recreational rights to the HOA for 30 years. That's how Karen and the board have authority to regulate usage." He tapped one highlighted page. "But that lease? It expires in less than 2 months." That snapped me to attention. "So what happens then?" "Meridian can renew the lease, sell the lake outright to the HOA, or sell it to someone else entirely. Most homeowners don't know this. They think the HOA controls everything." Merrick leaned in. "But here's the twist. I've heard through my contacts that Meridian is in serious financial trouble, and Karen knows it." Over the next hour, Merrick and I sifted through public records. What we found was troubling. Karen's influence went far beyond annoying rules. Through shell companies tied to her real estate business, she had been quietly buying up houses in the neighborhood, usually after the owners were bled dry with HOA fines. She's aiming bigger now, Merrick concluded. From what I've gathered, she's been in private talks with Meridian to buy the lake for herself. Not for the HOA, for her company. Her plan? Restrict access, then build luxury homes along the shoreline. Suddenly, the fishing ban made perfect sense. It was never about the environment. It was about slowly cutting residents off from the lake before she took it over entirely. That night, Merrick introduced me to another ally, Samuel Washington, a retired bank owner and one of the few residents brave enough to oppose Karen openly. Samuel, a distinguished black man in his 60s, had personally felt her subtle discrimination. He invited us to his study the following evening. His office was lined with bookshelves and a computer filled with spreadsheets. I started this database as simple record keeping, he explained, but the patterns became obvious fast. The data was damning. Homeowners of color received violations at nearly triple the rate of white residents. New families were cited for minor infractions, while long-timers were ignored. Worst of all, homes that lost value under constant violations were often sold below market, and many ended up in the hands of shell companies tied to Wellington properties. Her real estate operation is sophisticated, Samuel said, scrolling through records. She never buys directly. Instead, she hides behind a web of LLCs, Lakeside Investments, Wellington Holdings, Sierra Vista Properties, all leading back to her. He showed me 6 homes acquired this way in the past 5 years. Each case followed the same pattern: inflated violations, dropping value, distressed sales, then profitable resales after minimal renovations. Merrick nodded grimly. And the lake is her grand prize. Meridian has been drowning since the recession. They overextended on commercial real estate and are now unloading residential assets to survive. The lake was never intended to stay public. It was originally zoned for condos, but environmental laws blocked construction. Those restrictions have eased since then. With the right city hall connections, which Karen definitely has, permits could go through, Samuel added. Half. A dozen lakefront mansions could net 7 to 8 million easily. My professional instincts kicked in. Tell me more about Meridian's financials, I said. As a former venture capitalist, I knew how to spot distressed assets. Over the next few days, Samuel put me in touch with banking contacts who discreetly confirmed Meridian's shaky footing. Their pandemic-era development project collapsed, leaving them buried in debt. The lake property, worth about $300,000, was one of their few unencumbered assets left. Meanwhile, Merrick started gathering residents who'd had enough of Karen's antics. We rotated secret meetings, at Samuel's house, in library conference, rooms, even once in the back of a sympathetic neighbor's bakery. Each story followed the same ugly theme. She fined me for having too many Christmas decorations the day after I spoke against her at a council meeting. And the list went on. James Morris, a retired school teacher, told our group, "I've had the same Christmas lights for 15 years. Suddenly, Karen says they break some obscure brightness rule. My foster kids were banned from the community pool for being too loud," added Maria Gonzalez, a nurse raising 3 foster children. Karen's grandkids wanted the pool at the same time. When I asked what rule my kids broke, she said it was her executive decision as HOA president. Then there was Diana Winters, a young widow who had moved in just before I did. Karen personally led an inspection through my backyard, claiming it was for mosquito control. 2 days later, I got 5 violation notices for things my neighbors also had, but they weren't cited. When Diana pointed that out, Karen had suggested maybe this wasn't the right community for someone in her situation. Each account revealed Karen's method: isolate anyone who might resist, apply selective pressure through HOA rules, and either break them into compliance or drive them out entirely. Those who stayed learned to keep their heads down. Those who faced relentless harassment. Through these meetings, we built quiet alliances. Samuel set up a secure messaging group so residents could share stories without fear of Karen's informants. It was, in essence, an underground resistance in our own neighborhood. Meanwhile, I started digging into Karen's personal finances. Years of reading property filings and balance sheets had trained me to spot weak points. What I found shocked me. Wellington Properties was heavily leveraged. Karen had taken multiple loans against her holdings, funding her luxury lifestyle, and property grabs with borrowed money. If the lake deal collapsed, she'd be in serious financial jeopardy. She's not just chasing profit, I explained to Merrick and Samuel at one of our strategy sessions. She's desperate. If she doesn't land this development, she's done. That makes her both more dangerous and more vulnerable. At Samuel's suggestion, I met with Robert Chen, a real estate broker who knew the local market inside and out. We chose a coffee shop 20 minutes away for privacy. Karen's been trying to line up financing to buy the lake for about $300,000, Robert told me in a low voice. Meridian gave her a 60-day exclusive negotiation window. But honestly, they're in free fall financially. If someone walked in with cash, they'd take it. He leaned closer. And here's the kicker. Wellington Properties is mostly smoke and mirrors. On paper, it looks big, but she's leveraged to the max. She's been leaning on her HOA power to look successful. Truth is, she's maybe 3 bad months away from collapse. That's why she's so aggressive about the lake. She needs this win to keep creditors off her back. That was when my plan took shape. This wasn't just about fighting Karen, it was about turning her own desperation against her. As a venture capitalist, distressed but valuable assets were my specialty. The lake fit that profile perfectly. I had the resources to make a fast, all-cash offer that Meridian couldn't refuse. The only question was timing. We wait until Karen is fully committed, Samuel advised. Let her announce assessments. Let her tie her reputation to the project. Then we strike. Merrick agreed. The more she invests, money, favors, political clout, the harder the fall when we undercut her. That's when the neighborhood will see her for what she is. So outwardly, we played our roles. To Karen's spies, we were just a handful of irritated neighbors complaining about petty fines. She clearly knew we were meeting, as shown by the sudden spike in random violations, but she had no idea what we were really planning. Robert later arranged a discreet meeting with Tom Branson, the Meridian executive handling the lake sale. We met in a private law office downtown, well outside of neighborhood gossip range. Let me be direct, Tom said after introductions. We gave Wellington Properties a 60-day window, but there's a clause. If we get a better offer with guaranteed quick closing, we can take it. Frankly, Karen's still scrambling for investors. We needed the money yesterday. What's her offer? I asked. $300,000 stretched over 18 months with a messy financing structure, he replied with irritation. Our CFO wants a clean exit. We're liquidating everything we can to save our downtown project. I leaned back, then put my card on the table. I can do $350,000, all cash, closing within 7 days. Tom's eyebrows shot up. That would absolutely get my board's attention. But be aware, Karen has friends in City Hall. She won't go quietly. I'm counting on that, I said with a smile. 2 days later, I had a preliminary purchase agreement, contingent only on an environmental inspection that could be finished within the week. To keep my identity hidden, the buyer was listed as Thorncroft Holdings LLC, a company I had just created. Unless Karen dug into state business filings herself, she wouldn't connect it back to me. But she must have sensed I was moving against her. Almost immediately, violation notices started flooding in. Improper weed control, unauthorized landscaping material, mailbox the wrong height, even a fine for my garage door being the wrong shade of taupe. Despite being painted with HOA-approved color codes when I moved in, the charges stacked up fast. $100 here, $200 there, until I owed nearly $2,000 in just 2 weeks. Every appeal I filed was mysteriously lost or denied. It was obvious Karen was throwing the full weight of the HOA at me to wear me down. And then came the incident that truly crossed a line. Sen had left her bicycle in our driveway when she rushed inside to answer a phone call. Barely 15 minutes later, a violation notice was taped to our door, complete with photographs. It was clear someone had been watching, waiting for even the smallest mistake. The pattern of harassment was becoming undeniable. And it wasn't just me they were after. Anyone who associated with us quickly found themselves targeted too. Maria Gonzalez got a citation because her grass was a 1/4 inch too tall, carefully, measured by Karen herself. James Morris was fined for a bird feeder he'd had in his yard for more than 10 years, suddenly flagged for violating a vague rule. Diana Winters received a notice because her recycling bin was placed 6 inches too close to her garage. This wasn't enforcement. It was intimidation. Yet, it was backfiring. Instead of scaring people away, Karen's overreach drove more neighbors into our coalition. Each ridiculous citation added another member to our group chat. Within 3 weeks, nearly 30 households had joined, over a quarter of the community. The breaking point came when my daughter returned from school crying. "The kids are saying we're troublemakers," she sobbed. "Brianna said her mom told her we're ruining property values and don't belong here." Later, I found out. Brianna's mother was one of Karen's closest allies on the HOA board. The harassment had now reached my child. That night, after Sen was asleep, I called Merrick. "I'm thinking about selling the house and moving," I admitted. "This is hurting Sen too much." Merrick's voice was steady. "That's exactly what Karen wants. She's done it to at least 6 families I know. She buries them in violations until they sell cheap, then her real estate partners buy the homes. Don't give her the win." He was right. Leaving would hand her the victory. And worse, it would teach Sen the wrong lesson about standing up to bullies. That same evening, I got word. The environmental report on the lake was clean, and Meridian's board had accepted my offer. The paperwork was ready. Later, while rereading the HOA bylaws, I discovered something critical. Karen's special assessment, her plan to raise money to buy the lake, actually required 75% homeowner approval, not the simple majority she'd claimed. She was flat out breaking HOA rules, betting no one would notice. Closing my laptop, I thought, they've dragged my daughter into this. Time to show them what happens when they push the wrong person. The next morning, I withdrew $350,000 from my investments, about 15% more than Karen had offered for the lake. Samuel Washington not only supported the move, but loaned me another $50,000 to strengthen the bid. Within 48 hours, I signed the deal with Meridian Development. The 6-acre lake, including the 10-foot shoreline perimeter, was mine, not the HOA's, and certainly not Karen's. The timing couldn't have been better. Karen had scheduled a special HOA meeting the very next day to unveil her vision for the lake. She even hired architects to design flashy renderings, which I'd seen posted on the community board. Her plans included shrinking the lake by 20% to make room for a members-only lounge, wiping out the prime fishing spots. I kept my purchase a secret, sharing it only with Merrick and Samuel. Meanwhile, Karen doubled down, calling an emergency meeting and announcing a $50 a month special assessment, supposedly for lake maintenance, in reality to build her war chest. At the podium, she presented a slideshow titled Elevating Lakeside Estates, a premier vision. For 20 minutes, she spoke about boosting property values and prestige. What she didn't say was that her own real estate firm would handle the development and sales of the new waterfront homes. Then came the smear campaign. Without naming me directly, she warned about outsiders who don't share our values and financially unstable individuals undermining property values. Samuel stood up to defend me, but Karen humiliated him publicly, dragging up an old, resolved IRS issue. With fake sweetness, she said, Perhaps we should get our own houses in order before lecturing others? The meeting spiraled. When Sapphira, Duskland timidly suggested that maybe a community vote should be required before altering the lake, Karen fixed her with a cold smile. Sapphira, I believe your flower shop lease renewal is due soon. It would be a shame if complications arose. The threat landed and Sapphira fell silent. Watching Karen intimidate people so brazenly, I felt calm for the first time. She had no clue her plans were already dead. The lake was out of her reach, but Karen wasn't finished. She leaned on her ally, Mayor James Wilson, to turn up the heat. Suddenly, my house was subjected to surprise inspections, and the city began questioning permits from renovations done by the previous owner years ago. The mayor kept his hands clean, but his cousin, conveniently the building inspector, showed up to harass me about my deck. The pressure was working. When Sen came home crying for the third time in 2 weeks, excluded by classmates because of rumors, I nearly broke. Then, the call I'd been waiting for arrived. Meridian's lawyer confirmed Karen had been notified. The lake property was sold to an anonymous investor, and negotiations with her were over. Just hours later, Karen showed up at my door, her polished facade cracking. "What did you do?" she snapped. "I know you've been talking to Meridian. Did you sabotage my deal?" I smiled politely. "I have no idea what you're talking about, Karen. But I did hear the lake property was sold. Hopefully the HOA has a good relationship with the new owner." Her eyes narrowed sharply. "This isn't over," she snapped. "The HOA has a binding recreational access agreement. Whoever bought this lake can't just change usage without our approval." I stayed calm. "You might want to check the fine print," I replied. "That agreement expires in less than 30 days, and renewal is entirely at the discretion of the property owner." Karen's expression faltered for a moment, but she quickly regained composure. "The community won't tolerate this. We'll take legal action for access rights." "Good luck with that," I said, still smiling as I shut the door. The next 24 hours were eye-opening. Karen immediately called an emergency HOA board session, barring the general residents from attending. Through my contacts, I learned she was scrambling to identify the new owner and plotting ways to hold on to control of the lake. She even roped in Mayor Wilson, hoping to use zoning rules or eminent domain claims. Merrick, however, assured me all of it was baseless, given the property's history and its private designation. Within the week, Karen's desperation only grew. She convened another urgent legal committee meeting, claiming the HOA would fight to defend their lake rights. The mayor echoed talk of zoning requirements and mandatory public access. But, again, Maya confirmed none of it had any legal teeth since the land was privately held. Meanwhile, I was quietly making my own moves. I met with a water quality expert and a local conservation group to evaluate the lake's ecological state. Their findings were alarming. Years of fertilizer and chemical runoff from nearby homes had fueled abnormal algae blooms, and the fish population showed visible stress. While the HOA constantly used environmental protection as an excuse to limit fishing, they had done nothing to actually safeguard the lake. I also brought in a security consultant to plan camera placement and draft a proper management system for the property. Everything was falling into place for the day I would reveal myself as the true owner. That moment arrived when Karen staged her boldest move yet, a massive lakeside celebration exclusively for longtime residents, pointedly excluding the newer homeowners. She wanted to flaunt community rights to our lake. The Saturday event had catered meals, live music, and wine stations set up along the shore. But what Karen didn't know was that I had already filed paperwork to end the recreational use agreement early, citing repeated breaches of its maintenance terms. My attorney confirmed the HOA's failure to meet water quality obligations gave me solid legal grounds. The contract would have expired in under a month anyway, but this gave me the leverage I needed. As her party reached its peak, about 60 residents eating, drinking, and laughing by the water, I arrived with Merrick, my real estate attorney, and a police officer I'd briefed beforehand. Walking calmly into the center, I lifted the microphone Karen had been using for announcements. "Good afternoon, everyone. I trust you're enjoying this lovely day by the lake." Karen stormed over, trying to snatch the mic. "This is a private HOA gathering. You weren't invited." I held it firmly. "Actually, Karen, I think you're confused about who has the right to invite whom." I nodded at my lawyer, who handed me paperwork. "As the lawful owner of this lake and all shoreline property within 10 feet, I'm notifying you that you're trespassing on private land." The crowd went dead silent. Karen flushed crimson. "What are you talking about? This is HOA property." "No, Karen. It never was. It belonged to Meridian Development until 3 days ago when I purchased it outright. I raised the deed for everyone to see. Effective immediately, the recreational access agreement is terminated. It would have expired in 28 days regardless." I gestured toward the officer. "Officer Reynolds is here to ensure an orderly exit. You all have 15 minutes to gather your belongings and leave the premises." Karen's face twisted in shock, like she'd just been drenched in ice water. "You can't do this! The community has rights!" "Actually, I can, and I already have," I replied evenly. "And if anyone refuses, Officer Reynolds is prepared to file trespassing charges, but I doubt it will come to that. After all, Karen, you've always been such a stickler for rules." The crowd buzzed with whispers as I continued. "Let this be a lesson. When power goes unchecked, consequences eventually arrive." The party dissolved quickly, with many guests glaring at Karen as they departed. The aftermath. Several neighbors approached me privately. Some were shocked, others quietly impressed. Finally, someone stood up to her. One longtime resident muttered, "This has been a long time coming." Within the week, I had private property no trespassing signs posted around the perimeter and hired round-the-clock security. I also hosted a small press briefing with the local paper, announcing plans to transform the lake into a conservation and education site for children to learn about ecosystems. "The lake's been neglected for years," I explained. "Tests showed troubling levels of phosphates and nitrates from chemical runoff. Our experts will begin a restoration plan immediately." At first, reactions were mixed. But once news spread of Karen's real intentions, building private homes on the shoreline for profit, public opinion shifted quickly. Residents who had been angry about losing access grew supportive once they realized what she'd been hiding. Karen, furious, tried suing me for destroying community value, but the court dismissed her case almost instantly once my attorney presented the deed and expired contract. She then tried to weaponize the HOA with fines, restrictions, and even a lien attempt. But by then, many neighbors were questioning her loyalty and motives. The real turning point came when Sapphira Duskund finally spoke at an HOA meeting. Nervous at first, her voice gained strength as she said, "I've been on this board for 3 years. I've watched Karen twist rules, target certain families, and funnel HOA money into pet projects that benefit only her circle. Last year, we spent $80,000 fixing up the North Side Park that serves just 10 homes, all owned by Karen's friends, while rejecting basic upgrades for the main park that dozens of families use. Her courage sparked others. At the next meeting, multiple longtime residents came forward, recounting years of Karen's abuses they'd been too afraid to mention before. The floodgates opened. A motion was filed to audit all HOA finances from the past 5 years. As the books were examined, irregularities started coming to light, and with each revelation, Karen's grip on power weakened further. The neighborhood was splintering, but not in the way Karen had imagined. Rather than rallying against me, many residents started realizing the real issue was the HOA leadership itself. As doubts about Karen's control grew louder, I introduced a new initiative: free fishing passes for every child in the community. There was one caveat. Kids of current HOA board members could only join once their parents stepped down. Maybe it was a little vindictive, but it worked. The most satisfying shift came when families who had once mocked me beside Karen began knocking on my door, asking if their children might get a chance to participate. Some even began openly criticizing Karen, the very same people who had fiercely defended her only weeks earlier. "My son really wants to learn to fish," admitted Veronica Palmer, who had once been one of Karen's most vocal supporters at HOA meetings. "Your daughter mentioned something about a junior conservation program." Her unease was clear as she stood before me, the same woman who used to turn her back whenever I greeted her at the pool. "Yes, we're starting an educational program for kids," I told her evenly. "It covers ecology, conservation, and responsible fishing. Celine is helping organize it." Then I paused, adding, "But of course it's only open to families not currently serving on the HOA board." Veronica's face revealed a mix of irritation and calculation. "I've been reconsidering my role on the board lately," she confessed. "Some of the decisions don't sit right with me anymore." "How interesting," I replied calmly. "If your circumstances change, let me know. The program begins next Saturday." Within 3 days, Veronica had officially resigned from the HOA, citing personal reasons. 2 other board members quit soon after. Desperate, Karen spread rumors that the lake was polluted. I quickly disproved her claims by releasing certified water test results showing the lake was cleaner now than it had ever been under HOA management. Cornered, she made a last-ditch attempt to bribe Merrick Henderson, offering to wipe away his old HOA violations and even grant him a paid position on a new board if he helped her scare me into selling the lake. But Merrick had recorded everything. Karen's voice was crystal clear on the tape. "I can make all those violations disappear. There'll be a place for you on the restructured board, with a stipend, of course. Just convince Thorncroft the lake is a liability, insurance costs, environmental risks. Make him nervous." Merrick played the recording for me with a grin. "I think Karen forgot the first rule of being a villain," he said. "Never try to bribe a retired ethics attorney." Karen's downfall came soon after. One night, my security cameras caught her and 2 HOA members trespassing on my property. The footage showed Karen pouring something into the lake, likely to fabricate her pollution story. I immediately turned it over to police. She was arrested for trespassing and attempted environmental contamination. Investigators then dug into HOA finances under her watch, uncovering misused funds, selective enforcement for friends, and schemes to drive down property values before her real estate partners bought them. 2 weeks later, I invited the community, excluding the current board, to my home to discuss the future of the lake. Nearly every household came. I proposed transferring ownership of the lake to a community trust with 3 conditions. 1, a restructured HOA with term limits and transparent elections. 2, fair, equal enforcement of all HOA rules. And 3, an independent ethics committee rotating among residents. Then I revealed a final surprise. Even Merrick and Celine hadn't known. "Over the past month," I explained, "I've been quietly purchasing the mortgage notes on several properties here from Lakeside National Bank, including Karen Wellington's home." The room filled with shocked whispers. Using my banking ties, I had legally acquired mortgages covering nearly 20% of homes in the community, targeting Karen and her allies in particular. "I have no intention of foreclosing or calling in debts," I reassured the crowd. "In fact, I'll offer refinancing at below market rates to every homeowner. But first, we must repair the broken system dividing us." The vote to remove the HOA board was nearly unanimous. Karen was forced out in disgrace, facing not only criminal charges, but also multiple lawsuits from homeowners. Her real estate firm fell under investigation, and soon she had to list her house. No one wanted it. Her reputation was poison. Sapphira Duskin was elected as the new HOA president, promising fairness and transparency. The lake was renamed Rachel's Lake in honor of my late wife, and I legally transferred it to the community trust, ensuring open access forever. 3 months later, Celine and I hosted a community fishing day there. Families who had once been divided came together, kids laughing, parents mingling peacefully. That evening, as Celine and I sat on the dock watching the sunset dance on the water, she leaned on my shoulder. "Mom would be proud of you, Dad," she whispered with a genuine smile. "I think she'd be proud of both of us," I replied. A year later, our community had become a model for HOA reform, inspiring nearby neighborhoods to adopt our system. Karen, broke and disgraced, moved away. I was even asked to run for mayor after James Wilson declined re-election following revelations about his ties to Karen, but I refused. Instead, I created a scholarship fund in Rachel's memory for children who had lost a parent to cancer. Sometimes defeating a bully isn't about fighting harder. It's about rewriting the rules. And if you're facing your own HOA nightmare, remember, the strongest weapon is understanding the system and waiting for the right moment to use it.